Every gilded cage is built with walls of comfort. The only question is what you're paying for them.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to try to map out a really complex and, frankly, sprawling worldview that's been pieced together from a huge range of source material. We're going to trace the threads of a story that suggests the world you see every day, well, it might not be the whole picture. So, let's start pulling on that first thread. So our journey really begins with this invitation right from one of our sources. It's asking us to just hit pause, to set aside what we think we know and just follow the breadcrumbs. It's really a call to investigate for yourself, to ask hard questions, and to consider a perspective that absolutely challenges the official story. You see, the narrative we're exploring today is built on a few massive foundational pillars. It all starts with these seismic historical events, the ones that changed everything, like 9/11, and of course, the JFK assassination. And it doesn't just stop at historical events. It goes on to question these incredibly powerful financial institutions, like the Federal Reserve. And it also implicates these alleged secret societies, groups like the Illuminati. Now, according to the sources, these are not separate, random things. Not at all. They're seen as carefully chosen puzzle pieces of a much, much bigger picture. Which brings us right to our first section. The entry point, the way into this whole worldview, is almost always finding a crack in the official story of some major event. It all kicks off with one simple but powerful question. What if what we were all told is just plain wrong? Let's take 9/11, for example. The official story is something we all know by heart, but the sources we've looked at, they present a very different account. They claim there was never any hard evidence that actually linked bin Laden to the attacks. They say several of the alleged hijackers had received training at secure U.S. military bases. And get this, in the days after the attacks, when every single flight in the country was grounded, they claim that members of the bin Laden family were actually allowed to fly out of the country. Now let's pivot to another one of those defining moments. This quote from our source material just perfectly sums up the doubts surrounding the JFK assassination. The debate usually revolves around whether Oswald acted alone or if he had help, but these sources, they ask an even more fundamental question. And here's the counter-narrative they put forward. They point to documents that suggest Oswald was actually an FBI informant. They highlight testimony from Dallas doctors who were convinced they saw a wound on the front of Kennedy's throat, which, if true, completely contradicts the lone gunman theory. The sources also dig into the alleged involvement of CIA-connected figures and even claim George H.W. Bush had a hand in the cover-up during his time at the agency. So, if you start questioning the official stories, it naturally leads to the next big question. Who could possibly be powerful enough to orchestrate these kinds of events and their cover-ups? And this leads us to the idea of invisible architects, the ones supposedly pulling the strings behind the curtain. The term that always pops up in these sources for this hidden power structure is the Cabal. And they're pretty clear. This isn't one single group. It's described as this complex web of secret societies all working together. And their purpose? Allegedly, to recruit influential people from politics, finance, the media, you name it, and steer them all toward a common, hidden agenda. Now here's where it gets really interesting, the history. The sources claim this is not a new thing. They trace a line from ancient mystery religions and Canaanite orders to the famous Bavarian Illuminati in 1776, then to Yale's Skull and Bones Society, all the way to modern groups like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group. For them, this is proof of a plan that's been in the works for centuries. So this modern network, according to the sources, has a few key players. You have the think tanks you've probably heard of. Bilderberg, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations. But the list also includes older, more secretive groups like the Jesuits, Skull and Bones, and that mysterious annual gathering at the Bohemian Grove. Okay, so if a network like this really exists, how does it actually do anything? How does it influence society? That question takes us right to the alleged nuts and bolts of it all, a system that our sources call the global control system. According to the sources, this system stands on three main legs. The first, and by far the biggest, is financial control. The other two are informational control. That's about managing what you see, hear, and ultimately think. And technological control, which uses all our modern gadgets and tools to monitor and guide what we do. To get a handle on that financial control pillar, the sources say you have to look at how money itself is created. They break it down like this. First, the government spends more money than it takes in. To cover that debt, the Treasury issues bonds. Then, huge private banks buy up those bonds. And finally, and this is the real kicker, the Federal Reserve, which the sources always stress is a private entity, literally just creates money out of thin air to buy the bonds from the banks. The big takeaway here is that national debt isn't an accident, it's a feature. It's designed to create a permanent cycle of dependence. This whole financial system, the sources argue, is all in service of a particular ideology. They frame the great conflict of our time as a battle between two competing visions. On one side, you have sovereignty, national independence, individual liberty, and money backed by something real, like gold. On the other side, you have globalism, international law, a single global government, and a centralized digital currency. The second pillar is informational control. And this quote really gets to the core of the alleged goal. The argument isn't just about censorship, it's about shaping reality itself. The objective, they say, is to control the story so completely that eventually new generations literally can't tell the difference between what's real and what they've been told. And that brings us to the final pillar, technology. The sources identify a handful of key programs and technologies that they claim are the building blocks of a digital cage. We're talking about things like global digital IDs, like the ID 2020 initiative, social credit scores, central bank digital currencies that could track every single thing you buy, constant surveillance through cameras and online tracking, and big overarching plans like the UN's Agenda 21, which they argue uses environmentalism as a cover for more control. So where is all this supposed to be going? In our final section, we're going to put all these pieces together and look at what the sources describe as the ultimate objective, the endgame of this huge multi-generational plan. This table pretty much lays out the alleged blueprint for what the sources call a new world order. And the goal, as they describe it, is total centralization. Politically, that looks like a world government, probably under the umbrella of the UN. Economically, a single global currency and global taxes. And socially, well, a system of total surveillance and population control. It all boils down to centralized rule, a centralized economy, and total control. And this term, New World Order, isn't just used by conspiracy researchers. It's been said out loud, on the world stage, by world leaders. This famous quote from George H.W. Bush is cited over and over in the source material as a kind of open declaration of the agenda. So, to wrap it all up, the narrative we've explored today, drawing from all these sources, describes a hidden, centuries-long plan. The allegation is that powerful, secret groups are actively working to dissolve independent nations and merge them all into a single, unified, and centrally controlled global system. We've just laid out the worldview as it's been constructed by the sources. Our goal here wasn't to tell you what to believe, but simply to explain the narrative. And it leaves all of us with what might just be the most important question there is today. In an age of total information overload, with all of these competing stories and deep distrust in institutions, who do you trust? That's a question only you can answer. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.